This is the fourth in a series of videos about how to create an end-tier application using C#. Okay, so basically what we've done last time is showed you how to connect up the different tiers, how to connect the GUI tier into our data access business rule tier. And the way that we did it is that we set up a reference to this new class library that we're setting up. So we set up a reference here so that there's a reference to the user class library. So it worked, but it wasn't tremendously satisfying because it didn't really do anything. So where do we go next as far as figuring out what goes on? So our concept is this, that we have a data table, and the data table has a series of data rows. We want to take those data rows, create an object, and then add them out to the list. So this is the concept that we're going for. So the first thing we want to do is we want to establish our data table. And so here's how we establish a data table. That's just so that I don't have to continually type in the same thing over and over again. So this is a whole lot easier to type in, right? Okay, so now the next thing I want to do is I want to say I want to first create a user object. So I'm going to say user, and then call it my user, not instantiate it here because I'm going to need to instantiate it inside the list. Very important. So I create different objects instead of the same object over and over and over again. So for each, and now we have a data row, and I'm just going to be calling this dr in my table that I've just set up, user data table. So for each data row in that data table, the first thing that I want to do, now what's the matter here? For each, oh, I can't do it on that because it's the rows collection of the data table. It's not the data table itself. Sorry about that. Okay, now that's better. And now what happens is that I have to instantiate my object because I need to get a new object every time I get a new data row. Data row object 1, okay? And so that's going to be a new user object. So I want to instantiate it. Now I'm going to have to fill it up, and then finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to say my user list.add, and I'm going to add that user back. All right, so that's the concept, and now in between here all I have to do is I just have to fill in all of the various different fields. So here we have my user.id, and that's going to be equal to data row ID, right? However, when I try to do that, it's going to say, okay, well, I have an object over here on this side. I have an integer over this side. I can't implicitly do that, so I need to convert it to an int. Okay, and then it's my user email, and that's going to be equal to, now we're going to have to do a conversion. Email is a string, so we're going to convert that to a string, dr, and that's going to be email. All right. The next thing is my user dot name equals a string, and it's going to be dr, and it's going to be name. Okay, and that will fill this up. Now, I think one thing that I did is that I converted all of these things. I think that originally when I created them as string. In order to get them to show up, obviously, I need to make them public, not just private. And I don't believe that I did that in the last few videos. Okay, at any rate, I now put everything into this user list, and now what I have to do is go back over to the form side and make sure that everything is coming out correctly. So right after this, I'm going to say, okay, for each, if I load up my database and everything, load up the user list from the database, so I take this, load up the user list from the database, then what do I need to do? Well, what I have to do is I have to say for each, and here we have a user u in my user list. Okay, and remember, this is just a test, so I just called this list box 1 dot items dot add. And then I'm just going to put a U in there. Okay. All right, now I'm going to run the program and see what happens. And indeed I get, remember when I add the object to the list box, the toString property will show up, and the toString property shows only the email. If I wanted to show everything, and I normally don't want to do that, but for the test I might want to make it show everything, I just would have to, in here, do something like ID plus space plus email plus quote space quote plus a name. Okay, and now when I run it, okay, oh, let's see. ID, of course, has got to be toString. Oops, oh, it's ID. Okay. I think if I just say ID, maybe that will work. There we go, spelled it correctly. Okay, so I get 1. So I remember this is what I filled the database up with, and so I see that indeed what I've just done in order to fill up the database. So I filled up the data set and then used the data set to create data objects to pass back to the GUI tier. So next time we'll talk more about how to, remember we had these whole things here. We had so now essentially we've taken care of the load, but now we need to take care of adding and changing and deleting and updating. We'll talk about that in future videos.